Hi everyone, this is Gabby, and I wanted to do this little video because I felt it was really important to explain what is happening with HR6 and to not just celebrate today's accomplishment of a lot of people that have worked together to put this, but also to explain where this idea, right, and I'll explain what this is in a second, is going to have to do in order for this to actually go from being an idea to actually becoming a law. So, what's the first step of any time when you have any legislation is you come up with an idea. And so over 18 years ago, people came together and saw there was a need to pass some sort of legislation that would allow for young people who came to this country who did not have status to be able to, through different avenues, be able to do that. And that idea came to be known as the DREAM Act. And so HR6 is part of the idea of the DREAM Act that has been around for over 18 years. And so you see lots of little dots. And those dots here are made up of thousands of hours, so many different people, thousands of calls and support that we have seen for this legislation from actually millions of people and many Americans. But, at the heart of this has been staff for these legislators that have worked really hard to try to come up with a legislation. And so, one of the things that I'm hoping you notice is that this circle is not perfect. This circle, it's a little off here and there. And in order to get it to even to be close to being a circle, there was a lot of back and forth. Some advocates put some input. Advocates, pushed for legislators and these people to try to, come up with it. And so, all these little dots here represent just the hard work that so many put in order to make this legislation happen. And I want to emphasize that there's been just so many people and so much time and work that it has taken to get even to this point. So step two, once you have a bill, you need to move it through chambers, and there's different ways, and I don't really go into detail, but practically either you get this legislation from the House that passes to the Senate, and the Senate passes that version, or you create some sort of new idea in the Senate, right? And then you have that idea go through a similar process where it has to go from being introduced, getting members, getting folks to sign on as co-sponsors, putting it through committees, and you see the shapes are changing a little. Sometimes, the legislation gets more complex and things, that we don't necessarily like get added on because we want more members. And then we get to point, B where, here's you see them in committee and amendments and all the good stuff, and you get it out of committee to finally on the floor, right? So what this is ends up being a little bit different, maybe the shape. And what the Senate sees, right, is probably a completely different, maybe even a triangular shape. But the point of the matter is that this has to go through a similar process, right, of going through some sort of committee, being heard, being voted on, and then being brought up to the floor of the Senate. Sometimes, right, these two shapes, they have to find a way, right, if they're both voted on by the House and the Senate in order to move forward and this is what they call the conference committee, and come up with one legislation that gets voted on by everyone. And then if it passes, it moves on to the president for signatures. So here's the reality. So the House is governed, the person who right now is in the majority are the Democrats, and Nancy Pelosi is the leader, and she, with other Democrats and advocates and other folks, worked to get this legislation to move forward. Now, this is how the legislation has moved forward. If H.R. 6 wants to continue, it needs to go up this hill, right? And it was very hard, very, very hard to get folks to move it from here to here. And just doing this, I think we have to pause and thank the people who worked really hard to get here, because this was no easy feat. This legislation, all Democrats, except for I think a few that were not there to vote, and only from 198 Republicans, only 7 Republicans voted for this legislation to get here, to pass the House today. Now, in order for this legislation to move forward, it's going to have to go through here and then up here for signature of our current president. So it has to go through here and get to the Senate. Now here's where reality is going to set in, and where I think it's really important for everyone to understand. So the Senate is the people in power, is the Republicans, and their leader's name is Mitch McConnell. So if you've heard the word McConnell in the past, if you've heard of Mitch McConnell, one thing you know is that not a lot of things pass through the Senate, especially things that deal with immigration. And currently the makeup is there's 53 Republicans, 45 Democrats, and 2 independents. And what we have seen in the last decade or so, a phenomenon where instead of having to only use majority, right, 50 plus 1, 51, right, in order to get anything voted in the Senate, they ask for 60. And so we can talk about filibuster and all this stuff in another time. But Republicans have the power, and in order for Republicans to move things through or anything to move through the Senate, they usually request 60 votes, right, to pass a bill. So that means that in order for us to pass this legislation, H.R. 6, through the Senate, we're going to need McConnell to allow that to happen. And remember, it has to go through all the different steps, the different committees, etc., to be voted out, to then even be considered here. And we were going to need all 53 Republicans or 45 Democrats, right, with Mitch McConnell supporting it, which that's not going to happen, but let's just fantasize. But 45 Democrats, and we would still need another 15 to be able to get to our 60, right? Or we need the 45 plus 2, then we're only going to need 13 Republicans in order to get to our 60. So the point that I'm trying to make is that this legislation, to get them to hear it, it's going to be very, very difficult, and it's going to be very, very difficult to get Republicans. However, let's not forget that we got at least 7 of the 198 Republicans to vote on H.R. 6, which until this point today, H.R. 6 was not a bipartisan legislation. It was a partisan legislation, but because of those 7 Republicans today, it has become bipartisan. So now let's say the H.R. 6, by some miracle, right, is able to move through the Senate. We would have to go through all this process and get the legislation to then, right, move back uphill and then make it to the president's desk. Now, we know who the president of the United States currently is. We know what he has said and has done on immigration, and we know what his agenda is. So I think it's really, really important to not stop our advocacy because of this man and his administration and what they've been doing. And it's also not important. It's really important not to stop because of Mitch McConnell and Republicans and what they're saying, what they're doing in the Senate. But it's also really important for everyone to be realistic on how hard it's going to be. And it, like I said, it took so many people, so many hours, calls, etc., to get this legislation from point A to this step, point B, but we're going to need to go all the way through here and all the way through here in order for this legislation to ever to pass. So I want all of us to just be realistic, to enjoy the moment, to celebrate, to thank those people, the Democrats that worked on this legislation, their staff, the advocates, the people who have been working on this for 18 years. This is an 18-year in the making type of thing. But I think it's really key and important for us not to have false hopes, and for us to understand that we can't stop here, that if we want to get him to sign ever a legislation that is similar to HR 6, that doesn't have that, we understand it's going to change. It's going to be, a little ball, maybe a little square as it goes through this process, as we saw a little bit of HR 6 kind of shifting and changing. We need to push forward and push forward hard. So just wanted to share that, and I hope this makes sense. And I'm sharing this, and I really wanted to do this because I saw so many people, being so hopeful for today and what today meant. And I think that it is a day for us to celebrate, but it's also really important that our community understands and knows that we have not just one uphill battle to go through, but a very, very long and big one. Thank you.